Christina, can I ask you, why Ruth Ellis?
I'm still asking myself that question. You know, I first learned about Ruth Ellis and her story and life captivated me in the 80s in London. At the time, myself and a friend of mine wanted to put a coffee table book together. We were, you know, the whole idea, the visual of the, you know, capturing 1950s London gangland, toffs with criminals, villains. I suppose it worked with the lifestyle I was in at the time, you know, which was, you know, a lot of drinking, a lot of decadent overindulging and, you know, mentally breaking all the rules while I was trying to find my way into spiritually becoming a creative person that could manifest ideas. Like Ruth Ellis, I got stopped, and like Ruth Ellis, I hanged myself long before any concrete death came, because of the lifestyle. That idea in the 80s collapsed because we were due to meet a fellow who had worked in the little club where Ruth Ellis was, and he wanted to sell his story and he wanted to become, you know, famous, and we were very delighted to be able to offer that, and we gathered all the archival information. We had fantastic photographs when we sat down to talk to him, and the truth of it is he was so plastered while he was manager of the club that actually we got no stories. I mean, we were in there going, well, the Cray twins came in, didn't they? And he wasn't able to follow through with, oh yeah, I think so. So the idea didn't work. So that then got parked, all of the files, all the papers, all the interest got parked. And obviously somewhere it was bubbling, obviously somewhere it was still, there was still a hunger for it. And I remember when I decided for this particular installation, it was almost before the end of the Dorothy Parker installation. That was in Dublin. And it was almost, I think, the night of its opening, I was going home in a car, Ruth Ellis. Now, I think at that moment, the reason it came to me is I was sick and tired of Dorothy Parker. I was sick and tired of indulging the narcissistic, poor me, Dorothy Parker, and the very intellectual way of considering her life. I'd had enough of her. So I thought, look, let's have a bit of grit. And who better than Ruth Ellis?
And obviously, in this phase of your life, you were going to come at her in a very different way.
Yeah, that's interesting. Exactly. Totally very differently. You know, whereas beforehand I was, you know, in the 80s, it was very much around the kind of the visuals and the superficial style shots. I'd worked with Vogue, I'd worked with some of these magazines, and so my own head was with the look, the style, how to turn it around so it looks kind of sexy and it looks kind of cool. At this time it was about the deeper cool, the profound interior of her, which to me was far more glamorous, and I wanted to articulate that from a deep inside out as opposed to outside in.
Yes, but the noose and the trapdoor we see here is far from glamorous, and I've walked through the ground floor space of your installation. I'm gathering these are representational of your feelings about Ruth and the choices she made.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose first and foremost I'd call myself a poet, okay? Mm-hmm. So all of the objects that I choose are metaphors. They have a concrete meaning and they have a very powerful symbolic meaning. Mm-hmm. So in the installation work as opposed to the page, it's there for you to see and interpret in the immediate here and now. It's not there, as one journalist has asked, to scare. That's not its purpose. Yes, it's for dramatic effect, but it's actually about a potent symbol for you to immediately bypass your intellect and just have a feeling. So the work is always very visceral. My intention is to bypass the intellect, which I do think, for all its magnificence and value, I think it is the intellect, maybe beyond anything else, that prevents the human experience knowing and searching for the true understanding and meaning of love.
So you describe yourself as a poet, but some would say, well, this is actually an art installation. So how do you square it up as poetry?
I suppose I want to come at that with who says it's an art installation and who defines what's poetry. And for me, that has been the struggle all along, is that I am in a world that wants to define me and along the way define what poetry is and what art isn't. So straight away I want to challenge that. I want to challenge that. For me, it's about poetic meaning. You know, poets write poetry to call the poetic voice of the reader. For me, anyway, I mean, I don't know, I can't speak for other poets, but for me, that is the purpose of my own poetic voice. It's to tap the deepest aspects of myself, articulate it with a view to you being in those words, swimming in those words, and allowing your imagination. Depending on the words I choose, each word is very carefully chosen to prompt and evoke, not tell. That's the beauty of poetry. Part of my problem with poetry is that the poet itself has too much say. I don't want that, which is why the book, Sulzberger's book, was written in the way it's written in first person.
Yes.
But it's not me. I am speaking the poet's struggle, as Dante did in the Divine Comedy. You know, he spoke, there was Dante the author, but there was the poet taking the spiritual journey.
A separate persona.
A separate persona, just the poet's voice.
Yes.
And that way the reader connects completely with that experience, not who the poet is and what he thinks of this and what he doesn't think of that. And I'm doing the same. I want to strip away everything that will interfere with the experience that you have as you are reading the words on a page or as you enter into any of the work, depending on the medium. In other words, if the words are on a railway station, which I have had, I want just that word. It never has an explanation, it doesn't have quotation marks, it doesn't have a question mark. It's a word without any personality. You know, it's in block letters. Love, wonder, ask, respect.
You talk about poetry and love and respect and beauty, but yet there was very little of that really, certainly on the surface maybe, of Ruth Ellis's story, which is a sad and sordid one, marked by alcoholism, violence, betrayal, and ultimately her execution.
I'm taking in what you're saying, and it's very interesting, and it's almost exactly why I've done it. You know, you said it seems on the surface. Well, exactly. And my work is all about what's really going on, you know. And when you say and ask it the way you did, you're narrating the popular opinion. But to me, that's only an opinion. That's not a truth for me.
No.
You know, and what I find myself very frustrated in is I also don't believe that it is the truth for anyone who is offered a space and a place to reflect on it differently. So all the prose and all the drama and all the documentaries and all the films, if people don't stop and think, they will decide exactly what you're saying. They will think it's their own opinion, but my question is it really your own opinion? Because that's not my opinion. For me, the Ruth Ellis story presents and offers so much material to reflect on perceived notions of things. For example, you state that it's a sordid story. Yes, there was an element of sordid in it, but the piece that people have not yet commented on, for me, in all of the readings, in all the researching of all the files in London, and everything that's there, was her perception that this was a love story. This was her Romeo and Juliet. Now, you know, I'm not saying it should be seen that way. I'm not saying it shouldn't be seen that way. I'm just saying there is a truth to it. There is a definite truth to Ruth Ellis and what she did. She made a series of choices. She made a series of decisions. and they ended in certain circumstances. Likewise, in our own lives. We make certain choices, we make certain decisions. We can turn around and define her behaviour and relationship with David Blakely as sordid. Well, I think there are lots of people living in tidy little houses and organised little lives that actually have sordid thoughts. So what I'm interested in doing is acknowledging the universality of us all. We all can entertain and do entertain sordid thinking, whether we're aware of it or not. You know, whether it's just not even returning a phone call or an email. That's not sordid, but there's something being communicated.
Something a bit grubby.
Something a bit grubby. You know, whether you're in Sloane Street or whether you're in the East End, we all have different ways of expressing our disapproval. Now, language puts certain words on these, like grubby is a word that's used in middle class, you know, so-called educated environments, okay? Now, even the word grubby is a little bit sanitised for me. You know, I prefer shitty. It's shitty to do that to somebody. It's shitty to leave somebody purposely waiting. It's a humiliation, okay? So to me, you know, Ruth Ellis, the reason Ruth Ellis arrived at the conclusions that she did to shoot him, and again, I'm not in here with a moral compass, she felt humiliated. Now, the rope here for me, it's not just about Ruth Ellis' story, it's about our own. How do we hang each other in quick judgments? How do we hang ourselves? By not stopping, reflecting, and making an informed opinion. We do it all the time. And then we're fed a news media that tells us this. And then depending on the family background you come from, it tells you that. My question is, where's your voice? What's your thought about that? You'll have people pontificating, you'll even have poets pontificating, you have painters talking about what their artwork is about, and a more pretentious interpretation. For me, I go into much of this and I say, it's not about some existential notion. It's your back garden. You know, because this material comes from inside of us. You know, every writer is writing about themselves. That narrative they're producing is coming from inside their heart and soul. They've interpreted and they've put characters on it, and that's the skill of the writer. But the material comes from inside, and this is what I'm interested in. I'm interested in terms of us all and our humanity. We share very fundamental aspects that are critical in defining us. And I feel in the world that we're in, a lot of that's getting forgotten, you know, because we're living in a society that supports and encourages immediate gratification. Now what I've done is I've put in front of you someone who sought immediate gratification. Ruth Ellis is a brilliant example of somebody who went for immediate gratification. But my argument is, we're all doing it. We're all doing it whether we're deciding text on a phone, when we've been told not to use the phone when you're driving. That's immediate gratification. I want, I need, I'm going to get. This is just a dramatic, she was honest. What I like about Ellis is she was honest about that, to the end. I did it, I shot him, I wanted to shoot him. You know, in court she famously said, you know, when the judge stood up, it was the senior counsel, and said, well, Mrs. Ellis, when you pointed that gun at Mr. Blakely, what did you intend to do? And in his whole essence, there was a theatre going on. And in his whole essence, he was setting her up for humiliation. Okay? So there are very nice ways to be terribly cruel. What I love is she didn't allow the court and its power to dominate and control her thinking. As most of us, if we were sitting down, having shot someone, we'd be, you know, producing a victim narrative. She didn't produce a victim narrative. Sorry, can I just finish there?
Yes.
I think she turned around very boldly and boldly and said, it's obvious what I intended to do. I intended to shoot him.
Yes, and that brings me to the title of this installation, Glad I Did It. And you believe she was.
Yes.
Even to the end, even as she walked towards that noose, leaving behind 2 small children, she was glad she did it.
Yes. And again, it's what I like is that she's honest about that. You know, many others in similar circumstances who had lost their temper in an act of rage and did something kind of cruel and horrible and killing them, whether it was literally or figuratively. They'd retreat into a victim narrative and talk about my poor children, my this, my that, my that. And I'm not saying it's not true, but I've been in that position where the rage is so hard and high. You don't care, Madeline. I mean, you know, and again, the reality of it for me is, you know, having also been having experienced suicidal ideation, there's not a thought about the damage. In fact, you hope it. You hope you are, because for me, and I know it's controversial, for me, people who do commit suicide, consciously or unconsciously, there is a statement that says, you have failed me. Now you pick up the pieces.
And from my reading of your work down the years, I know you believe that we all have that impulse in us to kill.
Yes, I do. I have it. And I'm no more less human than anybody else. But my conclusion on that is informed by more than that. You know, it's more informed than that. I mean, I suppose with regards to the Soulburgers book, I just allowed myself to articulate the darkest of my feelings and saying, and starting with the premise, I'm human. Now, when that work went out, and I showed it to various people along its 15-year journey, I recognised that this actually is these are universal emotions and moments in time that I was articulating, and was encouraged by academics in the field that you're in here at Dante, so you go read Dante and see where that is. And in the studying of it all, I recognised there are universal experiences to us all, and one of them is thwarted desire. And thwarted desire is the focus of this work, is what happens to us when we feel denied what we want. Now, to survive, we all employ different techniques. You know, for some, it appears very benign. You know, I was at the airport the other day, getting stopped at, trying to catch a flight. And the people who were responsible for us being late, nobody was around. There was nobody. Yet there was a queue that stood for, you know, the best part of 200 yards. When I came down the stairs to find out the information, I was very struck by that queue. It was like Auschwitz. People waiting. People ready for a horrible fate. Nobody there turning around going, I'm not standing in a queue. I'm not. You know, their voice was silenced because they perceived an authority greater than themselves, and an authority that was going to give them answers. You know, which is, it's not true. We have to find these answers ourselves. We have to ask the questions. We have to search for the answers. You know, like the metaphor in that is, like, I was there with friends. Right, who are the people in charge here? Let's go up and ask somebody. Even if they don't know, we've got more information than we had before we walked up to them. Mm. But most people are walking around in a sleep. I call it in the book, in Dante had it, hell. People are living in hell when they're not taking possession of their own capacity to think. And they are living in this place that's driven by impulsive desire and impulsive decision making. In mine, I call it the sleep, whereas I believe most people are walking around in a sleep. And the saddest and tragedy, you were talking about tragedy in Ruth Ellis' story earlier, I think that's a greater tragedy. I think it's a greater tragedy that people do not know that they do not know. That is, to me, is a far greater tragedy than somebody who has taken a course of action, stood over it and said, I shot him, I hated him, he frustrated me, he humiliated me. At least she's living. At least she's doing something. Again, do you know, and I'm legally, it was right for her to be hanged, in whatever my opinion is worth. It's not worth anything. But it's what I'm saying is, I understand it. It's human.
Christina, can I ask you what drew you to this particular space?
For a project space, and
yes.
It's 3 floors. Well, I suppose it might be worth saying what's in my mind before I'm looking at the spaces. So I'd already decided that Ruth Ellis, I was interested in being, articulating something around and about Ruth Ellis. All of my work is about the nature of soul and how we struggle and strive and fail to achieve personal freedom. Now, the map in Soulburgers is 3 tiers, as is understood in human consciousness, that there are 3 levels of consciousness. Some say 4. But for me, 3 is, the unconscious, the pre-conscious, and the conscious. In the Soulburgers book, it's the sleep, it's the wake, it's the dawn. The dawn being personal freedom. So, Project Space has 3 floors and a basement. So immediately it had an interest for me. The basement being the deep unconscious.
Right.
Then it was a question, it meant a lot to me that the gallery were immediately interested in what I was doing. It's very encouraging that they got, as I said to them what I was interested in doing, even if it was unformed, that they got it and were excited. So for me that meant I was going to be working with somebody, as opposed to, when you're dealing, like I work on landscapes and I work with companies and there's always these kind of walls you have to hit. And so that was very attractive to me. I then asked for drawings. I got them commissioned architect drawings and could see straight away that I had 3 L's. That the spaces, without me doing anything with them, actually had 3 L's, 3 learning spaces. That was very attractive to me.
Yeah.
That at some level I was actually being allowed to that it was already there in the deep unconscious, a learning space, a receiving space. So then I had the 3 floors, and then I had to sort of say, and for me it was quite simple that the cell was going to be her mind. So as long as I had a space that was a minimum of 6 foot by 10 foot, I can do something with that. And then on the ground floor, because it has a window, that's a very powerful image, it's a very powerful object. For me, it always represents eyes and seeing or not seeing. So the decision to put on the ground floor the hanging space is that for at night time, that's a 24/7, just as it is in our minds. Death is always with us, whether we're aware of it or not. So to have that very strong image there and the hanging rope, and again, of course, for me, it's got to have a beauty to it. Because death has an appeal. I mean, certainly as a poet, death, I much prefer to be at funerals than weddings. That's just me. I just find them far more beautiful spaces.
You would.
Weddings to me, they're just piss-ups, they're just piss-ups. And, what do 2 young people know about love? Bless. They look beautiful and everything else. But, so, for me, there was something terribly poetic and then universal. This is a very powerful universal image. So that it became, it rolled from there that the ground floor was going to have a hanging space. I then had to decide. Every vision is based on the space. So if it's a page, I know I'm writing. If it's a landscape, I did it on a derelict building. I put my poem Compulsion, and it was a what you call a den, meth den. Drug den. And I just put the poem over all the paint, all the vomit, all the sick, all the beer, compulsion. And it stood out and won great interest and attention, which I was delighted with. And, so it's the space. Once I see the space, if I have an idea before it, I didn't know what I was going to do with the Dorothy Parker. I was heading into another project in a 4-store building in Dublin, and in the end, the landlord just fucked with me, he just wanted this and wanted that. So I had to jump out of there. I still had a deadline. We had to make, Rachel, thank God, was able to say, what about the theatre? I went and had a look at the theatre space, and straight away when I saw that schoolroom, I said, there's a psyche. I don't know what I'm going to do or say in the psyche, but that's a psyche, it's a soul space. I love it, and I'll drench it in red, and we're off to the races.
So would you say it's the notion of personal responsibility that principally informs and inspires your work?
And my life. I having led and lived a life of lacking responsibility and indulging all my wants and gratifications, which all addictions do, whether they're a substance or, I have friends who are obsessive about cleaning, friends who are obsessive about wearing. These are all addictions. Addictions have a purpose. They're not all negative. They do bind anxiety. But the flip side is there are consequences. So every choice we make, it's not that there's a wrong choice. The question is, are you prepared to take the consequences? So when I realised that I ended up completely disempowered, because I never took charge. I never took responsibility for the choices I made. You know, it was that shitty boss, that shitty boyfriend, you know, that shitty party that I got so drunk at. You know, I didn't take responsibility for the fact that I'd crashed the place, that it was 4 o'clock in the morning, that it was actually a forbidden club anyway in London, and I ordered the drink and I put it inside myself, you know, and then I snorted all the cocaine that was on the table that may not have even been offered to me. You know, I told a different narrative. I told myself a lie. So the journey out was about, you know, how did I manage and how do I manage to get more freedom? And in myself, so I can make the choices I want, that I can go on the date with the person I want, not the one I think I should want, or someone else thinks I should want, or I should. My choice. What do I want? So for me, if it's personal freedom is important to you, and for some it isn't. You know, people who are jailed are repeat offenders. They're very often repeat offenders because they don't know about life outside of a structure. And again, back to Ellis. To me, part of why she was very content in the cell was it was the first time in her life she could stop for a moment and pause. Notice the freckles on her face. She was being fed 3 times a day. Nobody had ever fed her without her having to lie on her back foot. Nobody had ever called her Mrs. Ellis. Nobody treated her with respect. Nobody acknowledged her. Nobody gave her dignity. When she is in this cell, what you see is a woman, and it's a persona. I think it's a surviving persona. But you see someone who feels they've got their dignity. And even, you know, Pierpoint, he says, above and beyond anyone else he'd hanged, he hanged 430 people. Not a figure he's proudly boasted about, but I've discovered. 17 of them were women. And he has seen fear. And he said that when she stood up in front of him to be hanged, the equanimity disturbed him. And she gave him a smile, I call it a Mona Lisa smile. Whatever that communicated to him, it haunted him for the rest of his life. So for me, without a doubt, this served a purpose for Ruth, whatever anyone else wants to perceive it as. You know, to all of us. And again, the cell is a metaphor for our minds. So my mind is free because I perceive it as free today. But when I was in addiction or caught in a tangle of a love affair, to me it was a prison. I was condemned. But the truth is, I wasn't condemned. I was condemning myself. Who put themselves into that prison? Who failed to think it through? Who chose to indulge in impulsive thought? I did. So, for me, if you want to know love, which very few, and again I will say, the only writer I respect and poet was Dante, because he didn't tell you what love is. He shows you through his poet's voice what happened in his mind and in the mind of the poet to prevent him from knowing what true love was and the freedom of it. And he takes you on that journey, which is exactly what Soulburgers does. It's a first-person narrative that takes you on the journey of knowing what love is. And the only way to know what it is to know what it's not. So Ellis, in her narrative, she sought, as we all do, to be loved. To love, to know what love is. To look into the eyes of the beloved and to look and to have staring back at us, I see you. For her, she experienced being seen by David Blakely. She felt seen by him. And that's a very, very potent drug. I'll also argue he felt seen by her. He was going to go and marry the right middle-class girl. He didn't. The truth of it is, he was as entranced by her as she was by him. The world and their circumstances prevented that love from finding a way through. How did they express it? Clumsily. How did they express it? Sordidly. How did they express it? Impolitely. Well, my argument is, so what? Life is messy. Let's go near what was really precious about this, is that two human beings had made a connection. And their way of expressing that towards each other was theirs. It's not for me. You know, there was a lot of violence. You know, they did a lot of biting and kicking and bruising and very violent. Now, that's not sexy to me. I mean, you know, but we all have our own particular way of feeling connected to. She was illiterate. You know, she didn't have an education. And for his own education, you know, he didn't go very far in his education. He wasn't very articulate. That had meaning for him. So in my mind, as I was imagining their love, when she was in court, they asked her about the bruises. In my mind, those bruises were like tattoos I've seen today. That was her way of saying, he's still with her. And it was his way, however primitive, of saying, you're mine.
Marking her.
Marking her.
So for all the dark symbolism of this beautifully curated installation, the noose, the trapdoor, the crucifix, the prison cell, at the end of the day, are you saying love is the answer?
And the question. I say love is the answer and love is the question. And in the looking at this, what I would hope just most of all is a moment to stop and think. Just think. Just stop and think. So it may simply, you might just come in and go, you know, I'm only interested in how this is physically being built. That's your choice. You know, if you don't want to see beyond that, that's your choice. I don't have a problem with that. What I do want to do is offer an opportunity to question more and to give yourself permission to consider more. And also an opportunity for you to say, maybe I have choices. Maybe I don't have to sit in a chair in my 80s, married to someone I've never actually liked my whole life, and, you know, the children are a bunch of ungratefuls, and, you know, that I can actually stop and say, hang on, you know, if you love me and I love you, can't we just stop and reconsider our lives? I want people to know that they have choices. That's it. After that, you know, and for me in this installation, most of all it is around love. One, ask the question, what is love? What is love? What is love to you? And what might it look like? And my whole thing is, this is what it looks like by showing you what it doesn't look like. Does that make sense?
Yes. Thank you, Christina.
Thank you.